Imagine a woman who every day, as soon as the sun rises over the poor neighborhoods of Porto Alegre, takes a heavy bag of cheap cosmetics and goes from door to door, humiliating herself for a few pennies of profit, and then puts on a nurse's white coat to keep watch at the bedsides of the dying at night, just so her children do not know what real hunger is. Imagine a man whose hands have been roughened by a welding machine at a shipyard, who after his shift does not go home to rest, but goes to guard the Gremio stadium parking lot, staring into the darkness of the night and dreaming that one day his sons will step onto this turf, not as a watchman's children, but as kings of the game. Imagine a wooden, wind-blown house in the Vila Nova favela, where in cramped conditions but without offense, to the sounds of samba and the shouts of street vendors, a boy grew up for whom a soccer ball became not just a toy, but the only language in which he could speak to the world without fear of being misunderstood. No one then, in the beginning of the 80s, looking at this small, eternally smiling child with protruding teeth, could have imagined that he, Ronaldo de Assis Moreira, born on March 21, 1980, would become that very wizard who would make stadiums cry with happiness, make enemies applaud him while standing, and forever change humanity's idea of what can be done with a leather ball. This is a history not just about talent. This is a history about how the greatest tragedy can break an 8-year-old child's heart into thousands of shards. But instead of destroying him, it turns these shards into the brightest mosaic of football art that the world has ever seen. The childhood of Ronaldinho, as he was affectionately called because of his small stature even among his peers, was not soaked in that hopeless, sticky poverty that broke the fates of many Brazilian boys. But it was soaked in the constant struggle of his parents, João and Miguelina, for dignity, for the right to give their children a chance at a different life, a life outside the favelas, where shootouts were commonplace and dreams died earlier than they managed to be born. In the Moreira house, football was religion, air, and bread. The father, who himself had played in the past for the amateur club Cruzeiro from Porto Alegre, saw in his sons the continuation of his unfulfilled hopes, and it was he, returning tired after 2 jobs, who found the strength to go out into the yard with little Ronaldo, teaching him not just to kick the ball, but to feel it, to caress it, to treat it like a living being that would reciprocate only to sincere love. And fate, it seemed, smiled upon this hard-working family when the older brother Roberto, a gifted and promising midfielder, signed a professional contract with Gremio, a club that was an icon for them, and this contract became that very lottery ticket that allowed the family to move from a wooden shack to the rich, prestigious district of Guarujá, into a big house with a real swimming pool, a symbol of success, a symbol that poverty was left behind. But fate, as often happens in the stories of great people, had prepared a cruel, crushing blow that was supposed to either break their will completely or harden it to the state of a diamond. Imagine an 8-year-old boy who returns home after celebrating a birthday full of joy, sweets, and childish hopes, and sees his house, this new castle of their happiness, surrounded by police and ambulances, sees his mother's tear-stained face, and hears the terrible silence that rings in his ears louder than any scream. On that day, in January 1989, the water in the pool, which was supposed to be a source of joy and coolness on a hot Brazilian day, became a killer. The father, João de Assis Moreira, had a heart attack right in the water, and he drowned, leaving his family, whom he loved so much and for whom he sacrificed himself so much, on the threshold of a new life, but already without him. Ronaldinho could not believe what was happening for a long time. His child's mind refused to accept the fact that his main hero, the man who told him, "Play so that the ball sings," would never hug him again, and this pain, sharp as a knife and heavy as a grave slab, fell on the shoulders of the little boy, forcing him to grow up in one night. Roberto, the older brother, at that moment performed a feat of which not every adult man is capable. He pushed his grief to the background and became everything for Ronaldinho: a father, a mentor, an agent, and a best friend, promising himself that he would do everything so that his younger brother's talent would not dissolve in tears, but blossom despite this monstrous loss. It was then, trying to escape the emptiness formed in his soul after his father's death, that Ronaldinho went headlong, with some frightening fanaticism, into football, turning the game from a hobby into a way of survival, into the only place where he could feel his father's presence beside him. He played everywhere, on the beach, on the grass, on the asphalt, and when his friends, tired and exhausted, went home, He continued to play in his yard with the only partner who never got tired and was always ready to run after the ball, with his mutt named Bom Bom. Imagine this surreal picture. A small, frail boy with curly hair for hours on end, until darkness in his eyes, dribbles past a dog, learns to dodge its fast, unpredictable movements, hones a dribbling style that would later baffle the best defenders of the world because, as Ronaldinho himself said, if you learn to outplay a dog that is faster than you and wants to take the ball away with its teeth, then outplaying a human will not be so difficult. This dog football, along with endless hours of playing futsal, Brazilian mini-football with a heavy ball on a small court, where there is no room for error and where technique must be perfect, formed that unique, inimitable style that combined circus agility and deadly effectiveness. The fame of the little genius began to spread through Porto Alegre with the speed of a forest fire when, in one of the school matches, about which all local newspapers would later write, his team won with a score of 23-0, and all 23 goals were scored by this little boy, who seemed to dance with the ball, not noticing opponents, flying through them like a ghost, and scoring from any position with a smile that disarmed even the losers. This was no longer just a talented child, this was a phenomenon, an element that was impossible to keep within the framework of children's football. And the Gremio coaches, seeing how he handled the ball, understood that something greater than just a football player was growing before them. An artist was growing before them, for whom the field was a canvas, and feints were paints. In a world where football was becoming increasingly athletic, pragmatic, and mechanical, Ronaldinho remained faithful to his father's precepts and the street spirit of the Brazilian favelas, playing with that primal joy that forced people to forget about their problems, about poverty, about death, and returned them to that blissful state of childhood when it seemed that, as long as the ball is in play, nothing bad can happen. Thus, through the pain of loss, through endless training sessions with a dog, and through the first, still childish victories, began the path of a boy who would soon force the whole world to learn his name. But for now, he was just Ronaldinho, little Ronaldo, who every time, scoring a goal, raised his eyes to the sky and sent a blown kiss to where, as he believed, his father proudly watched his every movement. By the time Ronaldinho outgrew the playgrounds and put on the jersey of the main Gremio team, for the first time in 1998, his brother Roberto, whose own career was ruthlessly cut short by a severe knee injury, had finally taken on the role of the architect of his younger brother's fate, becoming that invisible shield that protected the young genius from the sharks of the football business and allowed him to think only about the game. The debut in the Copa Libertadores was only a prelude to the spectacle he would arrange a year later, in 1999, when in the final of the Rio Grande do Sul State Championship against the sworn enemies from International, a daring 19-year-old youth met face-to-face with the legendary Dunga, the captain of the Brazilian national team, a world champion, a rock man whose authority was undeniable. Imagine this moment. An experienced veteran, accustomed to opponents trembling at his mere glance, and a smiling teenager with long curls who was not just unafraid, but turned this duel into a public humiliation of the idol, flicking the ball over Dunga's head with a mocking feint, then once more, and again, forcing the entire stadium to roar with delight and horror, because in Brazil one did not treat elders this way, but Ronaldinho played by his own rules. In that match, he not only scored the winning goal and brought Gremio the title, he seemed to crown himself before the eyes of the fallen king, declaring to the whole country that the time of old heroes was leaving, giving way to a new, daring, and unstoppable magic. This firework of talent could not remain unnoticed outside the club, and the call-up to the national team for the Copa America in 1999 became a logical continuation of his rapid ascent. But even the boldest optimists could not assume that exactly there, on the fields of Paraguay, a world star would be born. Coming on as a substitute in the match against Venezuela, Ronaldinho received the ball on the edge of the penalty area, and what happened in the next 3 seconds forever entered the golden fund of football classics. He softly flicked the ball over a defender, as if the latter were invisible, knocked it forward for himself and, not letting it touch the ground, hammered it into the net at an unthinkable angle, forcing commentators to tear their voices, and millions of television viewers around the world to jump off their sofas with the question, "Who is this guy?" Galvão Bueno, the voice of Brazilian football, shouted into the microphone, "Look what he did! Look what he did!" And in these shouts was heard the birth of a new era, an era where football was again becoming an art, and not just a sport. And this goal became Ronaldinho's calling card, his pass to the elite, proof that his technique is not circus tricks but a deadly weapon. But where there is great talent and big money, a big war always begins, and the idyll at Gremio very quickly gave way to a dirty, exhausting transfer saga, when European giants, like a pack of predators scenting blood, began to circle around the young star, offering sums from which the heads of simple guys from the favelas spun. Arsenal was close, Leeds offered astronomical money, but it was Paris Saint-Germain that turned out to be the most persistent and cunning, concluding a preliminary contract with Ronaldinho in secret from Gremio, which caused a storm of indignation in Porto Alegre. Fans who just yesterday carried him in their arms called him a traitor. The club management threatened lawsuits and demanded disqualification. This was the first serious life lesson for Ronaldinho, who suddenly discovered that football is not only joy and goals, but also lawyers, contracts, betrayals, and the hatred of the crowd. And for several months, while FIFA sorted out the details of this scandalous transfer, he was forced to train alone, deprived of the main thing, the right to take the field. Imagine what it is like for a person who breathes football to find himself in a golden cage, watching matches from the stands, knowing that your legs are worth millions, but you cannot make even one strike on the ball in an official game. And only his brother's faith and the memory of his father did not let him break during this period of uncertainty, which could have buried a less resilient player. But when the legal storm finally subsided and the plane with Ronaldinho on board set a course for Paris, he was leaving behind not just his hometown and club, he was leaving behind his childhood, flying to meet the lights of the Champs-Élysées, where new temptations, new glory, and new battles awaited him, for which, as it seemed to him, he was ready. Paris met him not only with a piercing wind from the Seine, which made the Brazilian accustomed to the tropical sun shiver, but also with the blinding brilliance of lights, in the labyrinth of which it was so easy for a young guy with millions in his pocket and a thirst for life in his heart to get lost. The Parc des Princes became his new stage, but behind the scenes of this stage, a drama unfolded worthy of the pen of French novelists. The strict, pedantic coach Luis Fernandez, who demanded army discipline and early wake-ups, clashed with the unbridled nature of the genius, for whom the nightclubs of the Latin Quarter, the rhythms of samba, and female attention were the same fuel as training. Fernandez put him on the bench, publicly criticized him for excess weight and lateness after vacations, trying to break this freedom-loving spirit, but every time Ronaldinho took the field, whether against the principled enemy Marseille or the modest Guingamp, he forced his critic to fall silent, turning the game into a solo concert. His goals were like flashes of lightning in the gray sky of tactical struggle. Slalom runs through half the field, shots contradicting the laws of physics, and this unchanging, almost mocking smile, which told everyone around that even in cold Europe, under the pressure of the press and coaches, he continues to play his yard football, where the main thing is joy, not schemes. However, true greatness awaited him not in gloomy Paris, but on the fields of Japan and South Korea, where in the summer of 2002, the Brazilian national team went, led by Sergeant Luiz Felipe Scolari, to wash away the shame of the previous final. It was there that the world saw the birth of the legendary trio 3R, Ronaldo, Rivaldo, Ronaldinho, a deadly triangle in which young Gaucho, the youngest of them, was that very creative chaos connecting the power and experience of partners. The quarterfinal against England in Shizuoka became the day when Ronaldinho finally rewrote his biography, turning from a promising talent into an icon. First, he dragged the ball through a palisade of English legs, issuing a pass to Rivaldo, and then created a miracle that still appears in nightmares to goalkeeper David Seaman. A free kick from 35 meters, from a position from where any normal footballer would make a cross, turned into a parachute launched with mathematical precision over the goalkeeper's collar. And while the ball, as if mocking gravity, descended into the far top corner, time seemed to stop for the entire nation. But fate, true to its love for dramaturgy, immediately threw him from heaven to hell. A few minutes after the masterpiece, a controversial red card, ejection, and tears in the locker room, where he, covering his face with a towel, prayed that the team would hold the score without him. They held it, and when in the final against Germany the last whistle sounded, Ronaldinho, collapsing onto the Yokohama turf in the arms of partners, was crying no longer from fear, but from happiness. Realizing that the boy from the favela who lost his father now holds in his hands the golden cup of which he dreamed. The return to Paris in the status of a world champion became the beginning of the end of his French chapter, because now the Parc des Princes seemed too tight for a figure of such scale, and the ambitions of PSG, dangling in the middle of the table, looked like a mockery of a player who had just conquered the planet. Ronaldinho felt that he had outgrown this level, that his magic required grandiose decorations, and the 2002-2003 season turned into a prolonged farewell, where every feint of his was perceived by fans as the last gift before the inevitable parting. Europe held its breath in anticipation of the transfer battle of titans. Sir Alex Ferguson saw in him the ideal replacement for David Beckham, and was already preparing the jersey with the number 7 at Old Trafford, confident that the Brazilian would choose rainy but stable Manchester. It seemed the deal was inevitable, the contract almost signed, but at that moment a new president of Barcelona appeared on the stage, Joan Laporta, desperately needing a messiah who would save the great club from depression and oblivion. Sandro Rosell, a friend of Ronaldinho and a man who knew his soul, played on what was more important than money and titles, on the dream to follow in the footsteps of his idols Romario and Rivaldo, on the promise that in Catalonia he would be allowed not just to play, but to make history with a smile on his face. In the last hours, when faxes were already ready to be sent to England, Ronaldinho's heart made a choice in favor of the sun, sea, and freedom. And this choice changed the course of football history forever, launching a chain of events that would return Barcelona its greatness. Catalonia met him like a savior, like a long-awaited rain after a multi-year drought, because the Barcelona of that time was a wounded beast, a club that had forgotten the taste of big victories and was mired in internal strife. But Ronaldinho's arrival instantly changed the very atmosphere of the city, as if someone turned on the sun at full power. His debut at the Camp Nou took place at the strangest time imaginable. At 5 minutes past midnight, in the so-called gazpacho match against Sevilla, when the club management, trying to bypass the rules for calling up players to national teams, scheduled the game for nighttime, and 80,000 spectators, instead of sleeping, came to look at their new idol. And he did not disappoint them. Receiving the ball from the goalkeeper on his half of the field, Ronaldinho rushed through 2 opponents like a high-speed train and from 30 meters hammered such a cannon shot under the crossbar that the sound of the ball hitting the net seemed to wake up the entire sleeping city. And this crash became the first volley of the revolution he brought to Spanish football. From this moment on, Barcelona ceased to be just a team. It turned into a one-actor theater, where every match was a spectacle, and Ronaldinho was the main director, distributing passes without looking, flipping balls with his back, and dancing samba with defenders who, it seemed, themselves enjoyed how beautifully they were being outplayed. His magic lay not only in goals or assists, it lived in his disarming smile, which appeared on his face even after rough fouls or misses, in this lightness of being that infected the whole team, from the veteran Puyol to the still very young Xavi, with the confidence that football is played to receive pleasure and not to suffer. The peak of this carnival was the year 2005, when Ronaldinho, being at the peak of his physical and creative power, received the Ballon d'Or, officially securing for himself the status of the best player on the planet. But even this award faded before what happened on a cold November evening on enemy territory. On November 19, 2005, the Santiago Bernabeu Stadium, the citadel of Real Madrid, a place where Barcelona players are usually met with whistling and hatred, became the scene for one of the most surreal moments in the history of sports. After Ronaldinho, for the second time in a row, as if in training, went through the Galacticos defense, leaving Sergio Ramos and Iker Casillas out of business, and sent the ball into the net, the stands filled with fans of the creamy ones stood up. They stood up not to whistle at him. They stood up to applaud the enemy, admitting that what they see is beyond the bounds of club preferences. It was pure art that is impossible to hate. And Ronaldinho, who bowed in response, became the second Barca player after Maradona to be honored with such an honor. But behind the glitter of spotlights and the roar of stands hid another side of the wizard's life, the life of an ordinary man who was trying to find a balance between his divine status and earthly joys. And the birth of his son João in 2005 to dancer Janaína Mendes became a moment of truth for him, a reminder that there are things in the world more important than football. He named his son in honor of his late father, closing the circle of family memory. And although his relationship with the child's mother did not form into a classical family, Ronaldinho always tried to give the boy that love of which fate had deprived him so early, seeing in little Joao's eyes the reflection of his own childhood. However, the stress from constantly being at the top, from the necessity to be an idol for millions 24 hours a day, demanded an outlet, and Ronaldinho found it where he was used to since youth, in music, in dancing, in endless fiestas that began after matches and often dragged on until morning. Castelldefels, a suburb of Barcelona where he lived, turned into a branch of Rio de Janeiro, a place of pilgrimage for friends, musicians, and beautiful women. And while his legs worked wonders on the field, no one dared to reproach him for violating the regime, because the result was on the scoreboard. It was a golden time when it seemed that this celebration of life would last forever, that his physical power and technique were inexhaustible, and no one, not even Ronaldinho himself bathing in the love of the whole world, noticed the first, barely perceptible cracks in the foundation of his greatness, cracks that would very soon turn into an abyss. By the spring of 2006, it seemed that Ronaldinho was not just playing football, but hovering above it like a deity who descended to earth to show mortals what perfection looks like. And the final chord of this divine intervention sounded in Paris, at that very stadium where his European odyssey once began. The Champions League final against London's Arsenal became the culmination of his reign, the moment when he, despite tough marking and pouring rain, led Barcelona to the long-awaited trophy, the second in the club's history, and raised the big-eared cup over his head, finally formalizing his status as king of the world. At that moment, standing on the pedestal under golden confetti, he owned everything: titles, love, money, fame, and it seemed that only eternity awaited him ahead, only new records and new victories because he was only 26 years old, the age of flourishing for any athlete. But precisely at this moment of absolute triumph, when the whole world lay at his feet, an invisible mechanism of self-destruction, embedded in the very nature of his genius, began its inexorable countdown. The World Cup of 2006 in Germany was supposed to be his coronation at the national team level, a tournament where the magic square, Ronaldo, Adriano, Kaká, and Ronaldinho, was supposed to destroy all opponents with its attacking power, but instead of a symphony of football, the world saw the swan song of the outgoing era of Joga Bonito. Brazil looked heavy, satiated, and clumsy, and Ronaldinho himself, from whom miracles were expected in every match, seemed only a shadow of himself, a player who lost his magic wand somewhere between celebrating the victory in the Champions League and the training camp. The exit in the quarterfinals by France, led by his old friend Zidane, became not just a defeat, but a public flogging, after which criticism fell on him like an avalanche. Journalists, who just yesterday sang praises, now savored the details of his night adventures, discussed every extra kilogram on his waist, and accused him of trading training for advertising shoots and parties. And the scariest thing was that they were right. The fire that burned in his eyes since childhood began to fade, dying out under the weight of satiety. Because when you have won everything that can be won, when you have reached the summit of which your father dreamed, it is very difficult to force yourself to get up at 7 in the morning again and run cross-country in the rain. The return to Barcelona did not bring relief. On the contrary, the gulf between Ronaldinho and reality began to widen rapidly, turning into an insurmountable rift. Frank Rijkaard, the coach who gave him complete freedom and treated him like a son, began to lose control over the locker room, where discipline was melting like ice in the sun, and where the example of the main star was becoming contagious in the worst sense of the word. Ronaldinho increasingly missed training sessions, citing mysterious muscle pains that doctors could not diagnose, increasingly appeared on the field with a puffy face, and although his legs still remembered how to create magic, and he could issue a genius pass or score a free kick, these flashes became rarer, giving way to apathy and indifference. But even in this slow fading, he managed to give perhaps his main gift to Barcelona. He took under his wing a small, shy Argentine boy named Lionel Messi, seeing in him his heir, and instead of being jealous of the growing talent, he became an older brother to Leo, passing on to him not only the secrets of mastery, but also self-confidence. It is symbolic that Messi scored his first goal for Barca precisely from a pass by Ronaldinho, who literally put him on his back during the celebration, as if saying to the world, Look, here is the one who will continue my work. However, the laws of big sports are cruel and know no sentimentality. The arrival of Pep Guardiola in the summer of 2008 became a sentence for the Carnival era. The young, ambitious coach, a fan of discipline and tactics, immediately understood that building a new great team with Ronaldinho, who lives by his own rules, is impossible, that his influence on young Messi is becoming toxic, and that parties until morning are incompatible with total football, which he wanted to instill. The decision was tough, like the strike of a whip, and unexpected for many. Guardiola pointed to the door for the idol of millions, the man who returned the smile to the club, stating that in his team there is no place for privileged stars. The farewell was quiet and sad, without loud scandals, but with a distinct aftertaste of bitterness. Ronaldinho was leaving not as a defeated king, but as a genius who simply got tired of being a god and wanted to become a human again, with his weaknesses and vices. In his last look at the Camp Nou, one could read not resentment, but rather relief. The understanding that this crazy marathon at the top of the world is finally over. And although fans cried seeing off their idol, Ronaldinho himself was already looking towards Italy, hoping that there, in the country of fashion and tactics, he could find what he lost in Catalonia, the passion for the game that once forced him to outplay a dog in the dusty yard of Villanova. Milan met him not as a written-off veteran looking for a quiet haven, but as a Roman emperor returning with triumph. 40,000 fans filling the San Siro just for the presentation, just to see how he juggles the ball, were living proof that the magic of the name Ronaldinho is still stronger than any sports statistics. Italy, this country of strict tactical schemes and defensive redoubts, craved a holiday, and Ronaldinho, who put on a red and black jersey with the unusual number 80, symbolizing the year of his birth, was ready to give this holiday, even if his legs no longer possessed that explosive speed as in Barcelona. But his mind remained sharper than a razor. This was a period of strange, melancholic greatness, when genius passes cutting through the entire defense of the opponent and goals scored from a standing position without a run-up, alternated with matches where he walked on the field like a tourist viewing sights. But even in this slowed-down rhythm there was its own aesthetics, the aesthetics of the sunset of a great empire. The nightclubs of Milan, with their temptations and luxury, became the same home for him as the stadium, and although coaches were angry and the press was indignant, Ronaldinho continued to live as he knew how. One day, one night, one game, until the longing for his homeland, for the sun, for samba, and for that unconditional love that only one's own can give became unbearable, forcing him to make a decision that many considered a step back, but which was actually a run-up before a new jump. The return to Brazil in 2011 was like a national holiday bordering on mass hysteria. 20,000 Flamengo fans, wearing masks with Ronaldinho's face, met him in Rio de Janeiro as a messiah, who descended from heaven to return the country's most popular club, its former greatness. And he returned it, giving the Brazilian championship perhaps the greatest match in its history. That very legendary battle against Santos, led by young Neymar, which ended with a score of 5-4 and became a symbolic transfer of the crown from the old king to the new prince. In that game, there was everything. An incredible goal by Neymar, awarded the Puskas Award, and Ronaldinho's answer, who, as if getting angry at the audacity of youth, scored 3 balls, including a cunning free kick under the wall, showing the whole world that the powder in his flasks is not just dry, but explosive. But Flamengo is a club where love and hatred are separated by one step, and financial scandals, salary delays, and constant pressure from the press quickly turn this fairy tale into a nightmare, ending with a contract termination through court and an escape through the back door under the curses of those who just yesterday wore his masks. It seemed this was the end. It seemed that Ronaldinho had finally turned into a caricature of himself, into a mercenary interested only in money and parties. And no one, absolutely no one, could assume that fate was preparing for him the last, most grandiose act of his play in the city of Belo Horizonte, in the jersey of Atlético Mineiro. It was here, in a club that for decades lived in the shadow of its more titled rivals, that Ronaldinho found what he lost many years ago: passion, sincerity, and family. But before rising to the summit, he had to survive a blow that almost forced him to finish with football forever. In 2012, when his new team was just beginning its path to glory, his stepfather Vanderlei died. the man who replaced his father, died of a heart attack, exactly like Ronaldinho's biological father 23 years ago. And this frightening, mystical rhyme of fate, this cruel mockery of death plunged him into black depression. He wanted to quit everything. He saw no point in taking the field when the people he loved were leaving one after another. But it was the Atletico fans, these simple workers, who hung a huge banner on the stand with the image of his mother and words of support. And this gesture, this wave of human warmth, forced him to wipe his tears and return to play, not for the sake of titles, but for the sake of the memory of those who are no longer near. What happened in 2013 in the Copa Libertadores cannot be called simply a sports achievement. It was a spiritual rebirth, a crusade of the wizard and his loyal army, where every match was a battle to the death and every touch of the ball by Ronaldinho was filled with some transcendent, almost religious power. Imagine this path. Dramatic victories in the playoffs, penalty shootouts where goalkeeper Victor saved balls with his feet, becoming a saint, and the final against Paraguay's Olimpia, where Atletico needed to win back 2 balls, and they did it in the last minutes, transferring the game into the lottery of 11-meter kicks. When Ronaldinho raised the Copa Libertadores over his head, he did what almost no one in the history of football managed. He collected a complete collection of the planet's main trophies: the World Cup, the Champions League, the Ballon d'Or, and the Copa Libertadores, closing this incredible circle of a winner. In his eyes at that moment, there was not that crazy, intoxicating happiness as in 2002. In them was the wisdom of a man who went through the hell of loss, through humiliation by criticism, through being written off as scrap, and proved to the whole world, and primarily to himself, that class is eternal, and a champion's heart cannot be measured by the number of drunk cocktails or missed training sessions. This was his answer to all skeptics, his final masterpiece painted on the turf of the Mineirão Stadium, after which he could leave into eternity with a clean conscience, knowing that he gave this game everything he had, to the last drop of his unique talent not subject to logic. And although ahead there were still tours in Mexico and a return to Fluminense, exactly this trophy became the real full stop in his great career, the moment when the history of Ronaldinho the footballer reached its absolute perfect finale, leaving us only memories of how one man with a smile on his face could force the entire planet to rotate around a leather ball. When the last confetti of the victory carnival in Belo Horizonte settled on the turf, Ronaldinho's career, like a setting sun, which before disappearing behind the horizon flashes with the brightest colors, turned into a kind of farewell world tour of a rock star, where football was no longer so much a sport as an occasion for the idol to meet with millions of adorers. His move to Mexican Querétaro in 2014 resembled more a visit of an alien than a transfer of an athlete. Stadiums that had been empty for years were now bursting with spectators. People spent the night at ticket offices to see at least the legend's warm-up. And even when he was late for training, even when his physical form raised questions among nutritionists, his single touch of the ball, his single no-look pass redeemed everything. He could afford to leave the field right during a match, could fly in for a game an hour before the whistle. But Mexico forgave him these caprices of a genius, because when he scored goals at the legendary Azteca Stadium, the opponent's stands, as once at the Bernabeu, stood up and applauded, realizing that they were seeing not just a player, but a living monument who decided to honor them with his presence. This was a time of pure show, a time when Ronaldinho no longer chased trophies, but simply enjoyed the remnants of his football life, as if finishing the last drops of expensive wine, and even a brief return to his homeland, to Fluminense, was only an epilogue, a quiet and slightly sad final chord, after which in 2018, the official, although long-awaited words sounded, "Stop." The official completion of his career was supposed to be the beginning of the quiet life of a rich pensioner, an ambassador of Barcelona, a musician recording tracks with friends, and a businessman producing his own wine. But fate, this cruel scriptwriter who never left Ronaldinho alone, prepared for him a plot twist worthy of the darkest prison thriller. Imagine a man whose face is known to every child from Alaska to Australia, a man who was received by presidents and kings, and here, in March 2020, this man finds himself in handcuffs at the airport of Asunción, the capital of Paraguay, accused of using a fake passport, a crime so ridiculous and absurd for a global star who does not need visas in principle, that the world first took it for a joke, for another advertising trick. But the joke dragged on. turning into a surreal nightmare. Ronaldinho and his brother Roberto were thrown into a real strict regime prison, into a cell where instead of luxurious hotels and jacuzzis, concrete walls, a cold floor, and neighborhood with drug lords and murderers awaited them. 171 days of imprisonment. This was not just a loss of freedom. This was a fall from the summit of Olympus to the very bottom of human existence, a trial that would break anyone else accustomed to golden spoons and soft feather beds. But Ronaldinho, faithful to his philosophy, even in hell found a way to remain himself. The story of how he played football in the prison yard became a legend that scattered across the internet faster than news about the pandemic. Prisoners, people with difficult fates and terrible crimes behind their shoulders, fought for the right to be on his team. And the main prize of that prison tournament was not a cup, not medals, but a roasted 16-kilogram pig. Imagine this picture. A Ballon d'Or winner, a world champion, a man who humiliated the best defenders of Europe now, in worn-out sneakers on dirty concrete, with that very same famous smile, outplays pickpockets and gangsters, distributes passes to them, and rejoices at scored goals as if this is the Champions League final. In this absurdity appeared the true essence of Ronaldinho. One could take away his passport, money, freedom. One could lock him behind bars, but it was impossible to take away football and the joy of life from him, that inner music that sounded in him always, regardless of the decorations. He became the king of the prison, a man to whom guards lined up for autographs and cellmates cried when he was finally released under house arrest to a hotel because he brought a ray of light into their gloomy world, showing that human dignity and a smile are the only currency that does not depreciate. But while Ronaldinho, like a hero of a picaresque novel, came out dry from the water, turning even imprisonment into a show, a real, black, and irreversible trouble was already standing on the threshold of his house, ready to strike a blow from which it is impossible to dodge with a feint. The global coronavirus pandemic that seized the world reached his family too, hitting the most painful, most unprotected place. In February 2021, after a long and agonizing struggle in intensive care, his mother, Dona Miguelina, passed away. That very woman who sold cosmetics to buy him his first boots, the one who was his anchor, his conscience, his main fan, and the only person before whom the great wizard was just a little boy seeking comfort. The mother's death became for Ronaldinho a nuclear explosion that destroyed his emotional world. Friends said that he locked himself in his estate, flooding grief with alcohol, arranging endless gloomy parties, trying to drown out that unbearable silence that ensued after the voice of the dearest person stopped sounding. This was a moment of absolute despair, when it seemed that Ronaldinho, who survived after his father's death, after the bullying of the press, after prison, would now finally burn in the fire of his own pain because losing a mother means losing the last bridge connecting you to that carefree childhood in a wooden house where everyone was still alive and happy. And in this darkness, alone with his demons, Ronaldinho had to go through perhaps the most difficult match in his life. A match for the right to again find a meaning, to wake up in the mornings when the main spectator of your life is no longer on the stand. But time, this only healer who never refuses help, began to slowly heal the wounds, and life, breaking through the asphalt of grief and loss, again demanded Ronaldinho's presence on the stage, because now he was not just a son who lost his mother, but a father whose own son, João Mendes, was preparing to enter that same cruel and beautiful world of big football that his father once conquered. Watching João put on the jersey first of the Barcelona youth team, and then pave his way in tough English football, became for Ronaldinho a new meaning of existence, an opportunity to relive his youth anew. But already from the stand, clenching his fists and biting his lips from excitement, which he never showed being a player. He wisely stepped into the shadow, not pressing on the guy with the weight of his surname, not demanding impossible feints and golden balls from him, understanding better than anyone else what a curse it is to be the son of a god, and allowing João to write his own, albeit not so loud history. Today, in 2025, Ronaldinho is no longer that carefree reveler burning millions in a night, but a gray-haired patriarch of the football carnival, an honorary ambassador, a businessman, an owner of wineries and esports teams, the face of media leagues like the Kings League, where his appearance on the field, even for 5 minutes, causes greater excitement than the finals of official championships. He travels around the world, opens academies, stars in music videos, and wherever he appears, in the slums of Mumbai or in the skyscrapers of Dubai, people reach out to him not as to a monument, but as to an old friend who is always ready to give them the most valuable thing he has, his smile. His attitude towards fans has become the talk of the town. He can stop a security motorcade to hug a crying child, can distribute autographs for hours, not refusing anyone, because he remembers how he himself once dreamed of meeting his idols, and understands that this love is the only thing that will remain with him when the money runs out, and titles are covered with dust in museums. He turned his life after football into an endless lap of honor, into a gratitude tour where he says thank you to the game that pulled him out of poverty, and to the people who made him immortal. And in this there is not a drop of falsehood, not a gram of arrogance. Ronaldinho today is the living embodiment of the Joga Bonito philosophy, a reminder of that time when football was romance, improvisation, and pure creativity, and not a set of XG statistics and heat maps. And that is precisely why his popularity does not fall with the years, but only grows, turning into a nostalgic cult. Young players who did not even see him live study his feints from clips on YouTube, trying to copy this unique plasticity, this audacity, this freedom, but a copy always remains a copy, because one can learn technique. But learning to be happy with a ball at one's feet when the whole world is against you is a gift given from above. The history of Ronaldo de Assis Moreira is not just a chronicle of sports achievements, it is an epic saga about a man who lived 10 lives in one, about a boy from a favela who wanted only to buy a house for his parents, but in the end bought the hearts of billions. He was the one who brought magic into a pragmatic world, who proved that one can be the best without losing humanity, and that a smile is the most terrible weapon capable of disarming any enemy. Yes, he could have trained more, he could have kept a stricter regime, he could have won 5 Ballon d'Ors, like Messi or Ronaldo, and remained at the top for another 5 years, but then it would not have been Ronaldinho, it would have been a robot, a machine for extracting trophies, and he chose to be a human who lives here and now, who drinks life in big gulps, not caring about the consequences. In this lies the great paradox of his fate. We love him not for how much he won, but for how he did it, and perhaps even more for what he did not win, for his imperfection, for his mistakes, for his human weaknesses, which make him so close and understandable to each of us. He showed us that a genius does not have to be a saint, that talent does not require asceticism, and that the main thing in football, as in life, is not the final score on the scoreboard, but that feeling of flight that you experience while the game continues. And today, looking at him, at this smiling man with gray in his beard, who survived poverty, the death of his father, fame, prison, the death of his mother, and his own fall, we understand that his history is not yet finished, that the final whistle has not yet sounded. What awaits him tomorrow? Will he become a wise mentor for new generations? Or will he again indulge in all serious vices, trying to escape from the ghosts of the past? Will he find peace in the role of a football grandfather, or will his restless soul again pull him in search of adventures? No one knows, and probably even Ronaldinho himself does not know the answer, but in this ignorance lies his whole essence, the whole charm of his unpredictable nature. One thing can be said for sure. As long as somewhere in a yard a barefoot boy tries to flick a ball over an opponent's head, as long as stands explode with delight at the sight of a beautiful feint, as long as people believe that the game can be an art, Ronaldinho will live. His legacy is not cups in a closet. It is a spark in the eyes of everyone who has touched a ball at least once. It is an eternal samba on the green turf. It is music that will never die down. And in this strange, cruel, but beautiful paradox, where greatness neighbors with carelessness and tragedy with comedy, lies the true, incomprehensible soul of the one whom the world will forever remember as the wizard.